So first of all, I'd like to introduce the Integrate movement. They aim to transform the way that services support excluded young people. It designs and delivers workshops with young people to share the street therapy approach, which was pioneered by the award-winning organisation MAC UK. We asked the Integrate movement to come and present to us this morning to share their ideas about how to do things differently and to hear from some of the young people who are involved in their work. So I'd like to ask you to join us on the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Shanti. I'm an ex-service user at MAC UK and now lead Integrate practitioner for an early intervention project called PAY. PAY stands for Positive Adolescent Engagement. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that afterwards, but myself and Julia are going to have a small discussion about some of the work we do at MAC UK and some of the engagement and the difference in the approach we have as opposed to some of the other interventions that are out there.
Great. Thank you. And my name's Julia Slay, and I'm the Managing Director of the Integrate movement. And as Emily said, we were set up by MAC UK, and really our mission is to spread and scale the work that MAC UK has started, in particular thinking about how we engage with excluded groups of young people in the spaces where they are. And we're doing that in a variety of ways. We're looking at strategic partnerships, we do frontline training, we look at working with commissioners and others. And really our aim is to make sure that all mental health services could be out there in spaces where excluded groups are and reaching them in ways that they're not at the moment. And as Mark said, we're going to run this as a kind of in conversation with. So there's a few questions, reflections, and then hopefully there'll be time for Q&A from the audience at the end of it. So should we start? Mark, do you want to say a little bit about your journey with MAC UK and what's led you to setting up PAY?
Yeah, sure. So I first became involved with MAC UK in 2008 when I was met by Dr. Charlie Howard, who's sitting in the front. She decided to come to the local area due to the fact that a lot of young males involved in a destructive criminal lifestyle, as we were at that time, weren't accessing mental health services. We were being referred by probation, youth offending services, but we weren't taking up these offers. So Charlie wanted to try and reach out to these young males. So we met Charlie. The relationship began to develop, but initially it was a standoff relationship. You know, we had never met anybody like this before. We'd never encountered somebody, a doctor, you know, a professional coming into our community, quite a violent, rough community at the time, trying to offer support and basically simply asking what it is that we would like to do. So as the relationship developed, we began to really feel that our participation was meaningful. It wasn't sort of tokenistic, and we developed and co-created a project called Music and Change. Music being the sort of the catalyst for change, as we were all sort of involved in music at that time. Years went on. MAC UK became a charity, and I became more and more involved in this charity, and my relationship with Charlie developed through the conversations, the therapeutic conversations she was having with myself. There were a lot of issues that I wasn't able to sort of deal with at the time of my offending and involvement in sort of a destructive lifestyle, but through the support of the charity and realizing that my potential that I had, I was able to sort of overcome these obstacles. The catalyst for change, for my change to become a practitioner in MAC UK and an employed member of the team, was the murder of my friend in 2011. This had a serious effect on my well-being, and with the support from others and Charlie, I was able to remain on a positive path, as it could have easily led me astray, as it does to many young males in the capital and across the country. A few years passed from that. I began to seriously develop my skills in this field, And alongside myself, my peers, two peers who were also ex-service users, we created the PAY project, Positive Adolescent Engagement. We found that a lot of young males and females, but particularly males, were idolizing many negative influences out there, and we wanted to aim at the 11 to 15 year cohort because we didn't feel that there were enough positive role models from the community that were engaging with these young males. So upon developing this project, we began slowly working with a young group in the community. This work became noticed by the local authorities, who then began referring young people to us. We're now working in a pupil referral unit and a young offenders institute, and our work is being recognised as a meaningful intervention. We adopt our own experiences alongside an informed mental health approach due to the work we've done with MAC UK.
And what's going on for young people in the pupil referral unit that you're working in at the moment?
There's a number of issues going on for the young people. One major issue that we see, and I can reflect upon myself looking back in my own life, is the disengagement. Young people are disengaged. They feel they're engaging in positive interventions is pointless to them. This is their outlook at the moment, especially in the pupil referral unit that I work in. And this is sort of a cultural thing that is adopted by the young people, and it's been going on from my generation, and it's been passed on to the younger generation now. And it's about changing that, I think. It's about really working alongside the practitioners who are in the services that are providing support to these young people, and really trying to get to the root cause of what is the barrier between the young people accessing or engaging with the service. And I feel it's about understanding on both sides, the young people and the practitioners or service providers, and really trying to develop a relationship, a real meaningful relationship, because that was the key for me, in my engagement and for me changing my life.
So having that kind of core, really trusted relationship is absolutely critical.
Yes.
And what are you learning through your work, well, I guess both at MAC UK and at PAY, about how you build that relationship with young people?
What we're learning is young people are becoming, they're being able to be more open about what's going on for them, whereas previously, as we found through discussions with them, a lot of these emotions that they're holding in, emotions that have stemmed from issues going on at home, issues going on in the community, in the streets. When a young person holds them in, they're already in quite a fragile state at the age of 11 to 15. They're developing, they're going through puberty. So to add this additional load of emotional situations on top of what they're already going through, it creates a monster, in inverted commas. I don't like using that word, but it's essentially what happens. And it's about really getting them to open up and not letting mental health be a taboo, because it is a taboo among many communities across the country. And it's about how we provide the support to these young people, not sort of making it generic and sort of protocol. We really need to take it to them and offer them the support in places where they feel comfortable accessing it. So this is what we do. Street therapy is the way we engage with young people.
And so taking it to them, at the moment in your case, is going into the pupil referral unit. But you've also worked in a lot of other spaces and places with MAC UK.
Yes.
What are the kind of places that you might have found yourself working and reaching out to young people in the past?
Number of places. I mean, I remember when I first met with Charlie, for example, when I was a service user. Charlie met me in the middle of our housing estate. it was a winter time, you know, it was very dark. And I'm not saying this should be sort of common practice for practitioners to put themselves in harm's way, but you know, she really she made us feel as though she cared by coming out to a place that people wouldn't traditionally come out to. So you know, we meet young people in the community. We could just sit on a bench in a local park, have meaningful conversations with them, and it's just about really letting them feel comfortable in a space, because sometimes a clinic can be quite daunting, you know, for a young person to feel as though they have an issue. And sometimes they don't even have an issue. They just wanna talk about something, you know. So yeah.
So all kinds of places.
All kinds of places, exactly.
And what are the problems that you're seeing with existing mental health services?
I mean, I wouldn't say problems. Look, the way I see it, and now as a professional, as a practitioner, and as a leader of my own project, I see many well-meaning people, you know, that are trying their best, but sometimes the system in which they are trying to work in, it doesn't support them enough. I mean, I'm working with a social worker she's actually not a social worker, she's a behavioural therapist, but she's taken on the role of a social worker for a young man who's in a young offenders institute. And she's got a caseload of 30 young people. So for her to deliver meaningful, tailored, catered work for this young person, as well as the other 29 other young people, you know, it's a challenge, it's very difficult. And it's about network alignment, you know. Some of the networks around young people don't communicate well enough. And this is why young people fall through the gaps, you know. So this is what we're trying to really work on that. We're really trying to align the networks in our local authorities and really get to speak from the same hymn sheet, so to speak. Yeah.
So aligning, so that's the staff, the professionals, all the services around the young people. And have you got any families
you know,
as well?
Yeah.
Are there any examples of young people you're working with that you could use to illustrate what that looks like in practice? That's quite a big shift.
It is, to be honest. I mean, the young person, one of the young people we work with who's currently in custody, he's a looked after child. He's been a looked after child since the age of 8 years old. He's been in a children's home, and we weren't allowed to intervene with this young man at the point of crisis. That was where he began offending on the streets. He began being involved with criminally minded older peers, and where we detected this, we weren't allowed through lack of funding, through, you know, just starting our own project. You know, we didn't have enough of a name at that time, you know, we were trying to, you know, be our own entity, so to speak. And essentially that piece of work didn't go through. This meant that 3 months later, the young man was in custody. He's now on remand. So due to that, now we've been asked to work with the young man. And I went to a LAC review meeting, which is a looked after child review meeting with him in the Young Offenders Institute. And there were 7 professionals at that meeting, you know, 3 social workers, key workers, youth offending service worker, probation was there as well, and ourselves. And I just feel like, you know, this is it's a massive amount of professionals to be working with one child, firstly, and secondly, if 2 or 1 professionals can do the job of 3, and they're not really talking. You know, the 7 professionals that were in that room came to that room not knowing what the other professionals were doing in the case of that young person. So, you know, it just doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me to have all these professionals in that room. So we're trying to reduce that. We're in talks with his social workers at the moment, and we're actively trying to reduce that. You know, we're trying to, for example, liaising with his solicitor. None of them had the right details for the solicitor, the legal firm that he had, his duty solicitor that he had from the time of arrest. we managed to get that in the space of 3 days after taking on the case. So, you know, it's really about caseload, supporting staff that are trying to engage with these young people, and the networks really communicating and speaking together. Otherwise, you know, they will fall through the gaps, the young people.
Yeah. So coordinating all of that, and that's also a lot of staff who don't necessarily have a background in mental health.
Yes.
But the interventions that you're doing are with that young person's mental health in mind.
Yes.
Yeah. And just something I've noticed, kind of working with you and with colleagues at Mac UK, is this importance of developing the relationship and how long that can take, which in some cases, you know, is hanging out with young people for 6 months or 12 months, and that investment in relationships and time is incredibly, it's the cornerstone of the successful work that comes later. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with before we move into some Q&A?
Yeah, I'd just like to leave everyone with a thought, regardless of what profession, well, we're all in similar professions, but what sort of area you're in. Just ask ourselves the question, could we have held this sort of conference in a place more accessible to young people, perhaps, you know? Just a question to put out there.
What would that look like next time we have one? Okay.
Exactly.
Great. So, do you need a roving mic? Do you want to take this one?
That was good.
Okay. Yeah, we've got five minutes or so for questions. Anything? Stunned by the silence. There's one in the middle.
Sorry, it's not a question, but I just wanted to comment and say how refreshing it is to hear from someone like you, because, like you say, as a young person, that you go to events like this, and like that, usually all professionals that don't really understand like the background that young people actually come from. But it's just a comment rather than a question.
Thank you, appreciate that.
I'm an ex-service user too, and like you, I got involved in participation, and that really changed my life. And I was just wondering, for you, what's been the most rewarding thing about getting involved in this kind of work?
That's a nice question. The most rewarding thing, I think, is seeing some of the journeys of the young people I engage with and work with, and, you know, tracking that journey and seeing where they are a few months down the line, and even, you know, if it's a small change, you know, it makes me feel good about myself. That's a really rewarding thing, I would say.
Hello, thank you for the discussion. It's great, and huge respect to what you do. I'm a clinical psychologist working with children and young people. I absolutely agree with your point about not just at conferences like this, but services being in the wrong place. You know, making young people feel sort of really alienated from what it is we're trying to achieve with them. I'm also a trustee in SPCC, and one of the things I wanted to ask you was about how we think about the impact of abuse on young people, because the young people you work with, a lot of them have had histories of neglect, violence and abuse, but they present in ways that as society we don't want to look at, and fundamentally we would see the criminal justice system as where they should go and deserve to go. Do you think there's a bigger cultural conversation to understand that people who abuse sometimes don't present it in ways that society feels comfortable with, and that the compassion that society shows needs to be shifted before we can really make the changes that you and your team are beginning to make?
Yeah, I think that's a great point you mentioned there, because it's quite, you know, a lot of the time I go to youth disorder panels in the local authority, facilitated by the local authority, and many of the cases, many of the young people that are brought to that panel, the action that comes out of their case is enforcement by police. Intervention is something, a meaningful intervention or therapeutic intervention is something that we, as a society, I feel like, you know, especially when we see, you know, there's a lot of gang situations in the media, you know, gang killings, young people getting stabbed, young people getting shot. sometimes as a society we want to just kind of keep it at bay, so to speak, you know. But yeah, like you said, you know, there's so much stuff going on for young people that is behind closed doors or behind a curtain, a veil, and you know, it can break your heart, some of the situations that are going on, and acting out in that way, you can kind of understand that, you know. So yeah, I think it is a bigger conversation that we have to have as a society, and really understand that, you know, that it's not just these young people want to commit crime, and most of the time it's not that, you know, it's not they're doing this for the sake of doing it. What is the root cause of this? You know, how do we facilitate that? What forum, what platform do we take it on? But very good point. Yeah.
And how do we show we care?
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer Dixon. I just wondered in your work whether you noticed significant differences between the girls and boys, men, women, and what are the issues you might want to point out that relate to women, girls, in that, because clearly they may express differently and have different issues to deal with.
That's a very good question as well. Many of our young people are males. About 10% are females, and that's in the Pupil Referral unit. And what a lot of the young females sort of display is kind of they act out as it's less sort of the aggressive kind of behaviour that the young males will sort of show. It's kind of it's more sexualized, what I've experienced in working in the Pupil Referral units, and you know, it's very dangerous for these young females to sort of be thinking like that at that age in certain communities that can take advantage of these young females anyway, and secondly, you know, as I feel, to know their worth, what they're worth, you know, to really know, to empower them, basically. They're not being empowered enough. So, I mean, the difference between the males and the females is basically one more aggressive, violent, sort of gang involved, and the females can be gang involved, but it's more kind of acted out in a sort of sexualized way.
I think what you said is incredibly important, and I think one of the real frustrations that I have, so just to explain, I'm a paediatrician, I'm the mental health lead for the Paediatric College, but I work in Lambeth, and I don't know how, you're probably not dissimilar to where you have been working. And it frustrates me that the response to people who respond to their distress and the things that have been happening to them, they respond with anger, or they respond by acting out in various ways, risk-taking. They are responded to in a very negative and kind of condemning kind of way, even though at heart they're expressing distress in the same way that other people who are expressing it in sadness or anxiety. And it seems that the systems are better at responding to certain kinds of distress than others. So I think that's true of mental health systems generally. There are certain sorts of presentation very happy to engage, but others are sort of pushed away. And I was really struck by your talking about how the response was basically to have a lot of meetings. And that's been my experience as well. You have a lot of meetings and you feel like you've done something, but actually what I really like from you, I got a little bit from you already, but I'd like more insight into what should we do instead? Spend the money we're spending on meetings, what should we do instead to really engage and turn these people into a different path?
That's a great question, and I too understand what you're saying. I think it's really the person-centered work, really thinking about the individual as opposed to sort of a blanket kind of understanding of a type of group or demographic. It may be quite resource heavy, you know, it may take time, you know, the developing relationships, for example, really understanding the individual themselves. And it can be any professional, you know, you don't need to be from the streets, or you know, Dr. Charlie Howard, she has absolutely no connections with the streets, but she managed to engage with myself and my peers through meaningful engagement, you know, not kind of the tokenistic service user participation groups that are held. I mean, sometimes they're meaningful, but, you know, generally, you know, it just takes time. But in the long run, it's cost effective, I think. I think really, you know, it takes time, but yeah, it's better than someone going to prison for 6 years and being, you know, catered by the state. So.
And just to add to that, and then I'll pass on to Charlie. So a lot of the work, a lot of the way the relationship is built is just through fun activities, or activities that young people want to do and want to lead and want to be involved in. So that could be anything from Zumba to faith groups to football championships in the local area. And a lot of the staff that are working in Mac UK's project certainly are supporting young people to lead activities in that way. Building relationships.
Co-production is something that, yeah, it's a buzzword that we use a lot, and it's, you know, it means something. Co-production. We try to co-produce everything and try and be as transparent as possible with the young people. You know, if there's fundraising coming up, we try to involve them as much as they feel comfortable being involved in, as much involvement as possible. You know, as they're comfortable with as well. So.
Do you want to take the mic from here?
Mark, I think one of the things that you've taught me over the years, and your mates, is just to get out there and do something.
This is Dr. Charlie Howard, by the way.
So I remember in our early days, like I sort of thought, oh, we're running an organisation, maybe we should have some meetings. And you were like, why do we need those, Charlie? No one else is in the meeting, they're all out on the street. I just wondered what advice you would have for people in the room, because when I first met you guys and on my journey, sometimes I was really scared of you, and I actually felt quite intimidated. And what advice you'd have for people that want to reach out and work with young people, but maybe sometimes for whatever reason young people are a bit hostile? How could people sort of manage that?
Look, the thing that works in many communities is having a gatekeeper. So, you know, it's about not putting yourself in a dangerous situation, yeah, too dangerous. Being smart, you know, risk assess things, you know. This is why as professionals we use risk assessment. So risk assess situations as best you can, obviously with the limited amount of knowledge you may have of the area that you would potentially be working in, but it's about trying to find a gatekeeper, somebody that is already on, you know, the early steps of their journey in changing their lifestyle, and really partnering up with that person, and through that partnership, you know, bringing in the rest of the community peers, the young people that are involved. That's something that many of our Mac UK sites they've always used gatekeepers. And just being sincere, you know, as professionals, you know, be yourselves, be sincere. Young people are quite good at detecting sort of falseness. Yeah, I mean, that's about it. You don't have to talk about rap music or things you don't have knowledge of, but you know, yeah, just sincerity and a real. And if you really have a desire to work with these individuals, it will come across, and it will reflect on the engagement you have with them.
We probably need to wrap up now. Could we end with a request, which is that Pay are currently nominated for an Aviva Community Award, and voting stops in 2 days' time. So if you have 5 minutes over lunch to get onto the Aviva site and sign up and vote,
Please,
that would be
yes.
wonderful. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Mark.